back to my channel. I know it's been a while since we last spoke. Things have been kind of busy in my life, which I will explain soon. But today is not about that. Today, I wanted to discuss an interesting topic that kind of came about when we were last talking about that BRICS conversation, right? So remember we were talking about how Ethiopia has applied to join BRICS, and in my opinion, that's a good thing, right? Moving away from the US dollar dominance over Ethiopia and the way that the US kind of weaponizes their currency against others. So, I was explaining what was going on there and why I thought that was a positive thing in terms of growth for Ethiopia. Now, on that video, you can probably go back and see it. Somebody had a comment where they said, I don't want to misquote them, but they said something to the extent of that they were surprised that Ethiopia would seek to join BRICS before seeking to join the East African Community, the EAC. And so I commented underneath them saying, wow, that's actually very interesting and something I hadn't considered yet. Because personally, while I thought, and I still do think, it's a good thing for Ethiopia and even other African countries to align themselves with BRICS at this time and move away from a US alliance or Western alliance, I do still firmly believe that African problems need African solutions, and I think an alliance on the continent would be even better, if we had a strong alliance like the countries in East Africa do. So it got me thinking, that comment got me thinking, and I did a little research into, why would Ethiopia decide to go the BRICS route instead of joining with the EAC, the East African Community. And so, the things that I found are kind of just food for thought, not necessarily reasons for, why Ethiopia didn't decide to go directly to the EAC, because I don't think anybody really knows. I think this is all just, subjective opinions. So I'll share with you what I found. And before I get into that, I do want to say, I feel like, the reason why I am even interested in this is because I think a link or, an alliance between African nations, specifically Ethiopia and the East African Community, would benefit both sides, right? And so, it just makes sense. I think it would be a very strategic move for Ethiopia and the EAC. So specifically, what would be the benefits to Ethiopia for joining the EAC? What I came across was that there would be a better trade alliance, access to coastlines, and ease of travel, throughout the East African nations. So, people who are either Ethiopian or have Ethiopian citizenship or permanent residency would be able to get into other East African countries a lot easier, not requiring visas and, things like that. And also there would be maybe trade routes that would go in between the nations that are there in the East African region. And so I think that would help Ethiopia. There are plenty of commodities and goods that Ethiopia can share with others and that they can gain from the East African Community. So I think those are probably the main benefits that I came across. And so what would be the benefits to the East African Community if Ethiopia joined them? The major one is that Ethiopia is the largest economy in East Africa and the third largest on the continent. So I think that would boost the East African Community economically, that if they all joined forces, they could be a powerhouse, And I did want to mention initially, I forgot, the countries that make up the East African Community are Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, I believe, and what else? I think the Congo and South Sudan. I believe those are the majority. If I left anybody out, Uganda. I think Uganda is also part of the East African Community. So it's mostly those nations. I think Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia are the ones that are not currently involved. So I just wanted to list the nations that are at play here. So back to Ethiopia joining the EAC. So one reason, or a few reasons why Ethiopia may not have joined up to this point, is that Ethiopia is culturally and historically different from the other nations that are in the East African community. So for example, the majority of the nations that are part of the EAC speak Swahili or some form of Swahili. Ethiopia's main language is Amharic, and they have also Afan Oromo, Tigrinya, and other ethnic languages that are present. I think it's 80 plus languages and cultures in Ethiopia, and none of them is Swahili. So that is a main difference. Additionally, those East African nations part of the EAC were former British colonies. The majority of them were. I'm not saying all of them, but for the most part they were. Ethiopia was not formally colonized. So that is another difference that Ethiopia has from the East African communities. Also on top of that, there are, like I said, cultural differences in terms of their ethnic makeup and background. So the nations, the EAC nations are mostly made up of the Bantu people, while Ethiopians are mostly Semitic and Cushitic. So there's a little bit of cultural and historical difference between Ethiopia and the EAC. That does not mean that they could not join forces. It just may be an indication of why it hasn't happened immediately, why it made sense for the other nations to join up right away, and Ethiopia maybe will come later. Another reason that Ethiopia has maybe yet to join the EAC is that Ethiopia, to my knowledge, was not invited to join the EAC. On the other hand, Ethiopia was encouraged, I believe, by China to join BRICS. So that might also be part of what's going on there, is that maybe there just hasn't been the extended invitation. I think I read somewhere that the EAC is considering having Ethiopia and even Somalia join, and is looking to pursue Somalia first because they have that, I think it's the longest coastline in Africa, is what I read. So that would make a lot of sense for them in terms of trade. And then maybe once they get those things ironed out, then they will look forward to Ethiopia. So like I said, these are not necessarily reasons why Ethiopia is not a part of the EAC. It's just basic my own observations as to why maybe it hasn't happened sooner, and maybe why Ethiopia pursued BRICS. At the end of the day, I think those East African nations can still work together to build a stronger East Africa and Africa as a whole on the continent. And for those of you out there who are familiar with the dam project that Ethiopia is working on, the Grand Renaissance Dam, the Grand Renaissance Dam is what it's called. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, the Grand Renaissance Dam that Ethiopia is working on could potentially provide hydroelectric power to the entire East African region and maybe even the entire continent. So that is a wonderful thing that, could just bring the countries closer together, even without joining the EAC. And, Ethiopia could export their hydroelectric power, for example. So, I just thought this was an interesting topic to cover because it's something that I personally never even thought about or considered. But, I'm so glad that viewer brought it up in their comment because, while the BRICS is a good alternative from the Western powers, at the end of the day, I still believe, we have to be careful as African people. Those of us who are there on the continent and those of us in the diaspora, when it comes to joining arms with other nations, outside of the continent, such as China or Russia or the Western powers or anybody, I think that we have to be cautious, when we enter into these agreements because, I don't want to keep saying at the end of the day, but the bottom line is, there you go, other nations are seeking to advance their own agenda, their own interests, so that includes China and Russia, and that includes Ethiopia and other nations. Everybody's kind of looking out for themselves. And while the BRICS alliance would give Ethiopia and other nations that join it a little bit more freedom from the weaponization of the dollar, it kind of puts them in a different realm where China or Russia or somebody may try to advance their own currency, and who knows in the future if they will weaponize it. So I just thought it was a very interesting comment and something that we could cover. And just stay tuned and keep watching the channel. Like I said, we are actually going to be having a big announcement soon, and it's going to be in the next couple videos, so just keep an eye out for it, guys. But anyways, let me know if you enjoyed this content, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.